vulnerable, like the Kayaye concept that we have in Ghana. Our Kayayes are vulnerable. They come from the rural communities into the cities with the hope of finding a better life. They come to work to take care of themselves, but they are exposed because they do not have any decent places of accommodation. They are open to the risks of rape. And we find this cycle of poverty going on and on and on because they do not have the right environment to engage in whatever trade or income generating activity they want to engage in. Mm-hmm. So I see here a very clear link between providing the needed accommodation for people who need it so that they can engage in the kind of economic enterprises or activities they want to engage in. Again, it tells us that there is a clear distinction when it comes to the social protection of men and women, because in as much as we would have some people like involved in something like what the Kayaye do, they are not easily exposed to the hazard of or the risk of rape. Another thing that I want to bring to the fore has to do with education. If we are providing education in a way that everybody has a good share, what happens to that young, brilliant girl or boy in a rural community that does not have motorable roads and their school is located maybe 10 miles, 12 miles away from where they live? What happens to that young child who has to cross the river with a canoe or a boat before they get to the school? What happens to the children studying under trees? What happens to the children who are studying in rooms that do not have roofs over their heads and do not have chairs to sit on, but lies on the floor or sits on the ground to write on a piece of paper? So when we talk about these things, we are social protection, and we are covering education, we are covering environment, we are covering health, then we actually looking at a system that provides the needed resources. But for education, because we cannot provide all of the needed resources, that is why it becomes very imperative that governments begin to consider how we can use open and distance education to bridge the gap. Maybe I have to pause here and come again at another time.
Thank you very much. I think that you have really highlighted the multidimensional nature of social protection, and that in as much as, you know, education is one very important way of solving it, there's so many allied problems that even make education difficult. You know, because of gender-based violence, for example. And I think this is a good place for Sherry to come in. So Sherry, you've done reports on the multidimensional nature of this problem. And Mrs. Ahoy mentioned, you know, the fact that education in itself, and also educating families and making sure that they have, you know, they have the sensibilities to ensure child protection is very important. But we also realize that, you know, all these things take money. You were talking about cash transfers, and there's a lot of research that says that instead of giving people education or giving them food or giving them housing, give them the cash and they'll sort out all these problems. A lot of the research that's point to the fact that you know, cash transfers actually do work, but at the same time, there's so many other benefits that we need to give. We know, for example, in the UK, that there are housing benefits, there are some sort of cash transfers, there's a very good functioning health system, there are helplines for gender-based violence. What are we missing, especially in the developing context, in Africa, in India? What is missing, and what are we not doing yet? what do you think is the next step to ensure that we have comprehensive child protection and social protection systems, and especially ones that, put the children at the center of social protection?
Thank you. So I think you actually mentioned this right at the start of the session, is that when social protection policies start to be enacted, actually the priority tends to be towards older persons, so providing pensions and starting at that age group and then working down, which means children end up being the last to benefit. But the reality is that if we take a more equitable approach, as was the premise for this question, and we look at how we move people along together in that provision, then we can start saving lives. And when children and young people have that dedicated support at an early age, they are much more likely to then enter school, stay in school, and pursue education, which then enables them to take on jobs where they are able to earn at a level where they're paying tax and supporting their families. So we can't do one without looking at the other. That's where I believe, but I just want to be absolutely clear about certain things. Social protection is a human right. It is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is SDG 1.3. So the duty bearer for human rights and the SDGs is states, but there is a shared duty between parents and the state for protecting children. So I completely agree with those inputs that were given by the previous speakers. But as you said, the reality is who's going to pay for this? And so we know that there are governments that are proving willing, and the issue is that they don't find sufficient money in their budget. Now, I do believe there is fiscal space to change budgets around. I'm a left-wing campaigner, so I do believe that military budgets can and should be reduced to pay for public services. And just to say as well, it's not just about budget for social protection, it is about budget for education systems, it's about budget for healthcare, it's about budget for protecting children against violence, and making sure that there is support mechanisms for children who are at risk of FGM or risk of early marriage. So social protection isn't a standalone thing. It has to go side by side with improved public services. And I think, when you're talking about online learning for children who might have to get a canoe to go to school, well, if they have to get a canoe to go to school, they probably don't have internet access. So, there's money that needs to be spent on ensuring that digital divide is eradicated. But I just want to be really clear about this money. I was on another youth-led summit last week where I was just an audience member, and somebody asked the question, but all these rich countries are saying they don't have the money, so how are we going to pay for stuff? The reality is that since 2016, 20 million more African children have been forced into child labour, but the world gained 10 trillion in global wealth. $10 trillion. And during the pandemic alone, the world created 10 new billionaires every week. But at the same time, 61,000 children went into child labour. So there is not a problem with the world not having enough money. And we know that tax evasion, tax fraud is a huge problem, particularly for lower income countries. $45 billion is lost every year by low income countries to tax evasion. So there is money, it's just that there needs to be equitable and non-discriminatory global laws and national laws which ensure that that money goes to the people who need it the most.
All right, thank you very much, Sherry. At the same time, it also sounds a bit awkward that there's still that system of dependency, right? It's about how to redistribute the money. It's about who is going to help, the developing world sponsor social protection systems. But I think, very much so is also about managing leakages and corruption and wastage that can be used for social